Would you believe me if I told you that Ayato may be one of the strongest and most flexible units we have to date? Ayato's last banner was almost a year ago, and with some new Hydra options coming around as well as some new team styles, we will see how this impacted Ayato's performance with both new and existing options as well as the relevance of Ayato as a whole. This is Taiso Games and welcome back to yet another Rerun review. Ayato has always been at the center point of discussions ever since its release. He was up against Child, one of the strongest on-field DPS at the time, and was the focal point for what made a Hydra unit feel DPS strong. This doesn't help that after Ayato's release, we had strong Hydra characters like Yelan, now Verena, that take over the meta, as well as a certain little gentleman whose name starts with the letter N and ends with Uvalet. Yelan is a bit of an unfair comparison though. You see, she doesn't really want to be in most of the teams Ayato is in, as Ayato doesn't really like teams with more than one Hydra unit. He seems to be a little bit of a diva, but we'll let it slide this time. Ayato and Yelan simply aren't being used at the same time, and it just boils down to that. They are both strong in their own ways and their own teams, and they function differently. Ayato is mainly an on-field DPS, and unless you have Yelan C6, she will mainly remain off-field. Farina, on the other hand, goes completely against everything I just said, mostly. Ayato is no longer a diva when it comes to Farina, and instead wants to be part of her show and partake in her amazing duet, which still makes him a little bit of a diva, but let's move on, shall we? Farina is, in most teams, a great way to increase Ayato's damage. He's one of the strongest buffers in the game, and it's no different for Ayato. Farina is able to unlock the ability for Ayato to hypercarry without need of constellations, and with the new Fontaine craftable sword, he even has a great FTP option as well as new artifact set, that being Undersea Hunter. Farina has to be one of the biggest Ayato buffs we've ever seen, and it's definitely a must pull if you love Ayato, which I hope you do. Nuvola is our third addition to the Hydra DPS lineup, and a very strong one at that, quickly becoming one of the best Hydra characters that has only gotten better and better with Farina's recent addition. As you see, Ayato is not short of competition, which makes him no short of criticism. Ayato's relevance has always been held by his comparison and the units around him. The thing is though, this doesn't make Ayato any less strong, and in fact, Ayato remains an incredible unit in spite of this. I would even say he's one of, if not the most flexible DPS in the game. Now, why would I claim something so ludicrous without even explaining why? Well, you see here, mister, because I can't. Ayato has a variety of team comps. Vape, Taser, Hyperbloom, Hyperfridge, Version, Freeze, Over Vape, Carry, Salad. And with all these teams, it also leads to Ayato being able to run a multitude of artifact sets as well. And while Ayato may not be the shining star of every team he's in, he's a character that can be virtually put in any team that involves a Hydra and fit in quite comfortably. And this translates to his artifact sets as well. Now, there are definitely better sets than others, of course, but depending on what you want your Ayato to do and function, use a different artifact set. And some of them can actually lead to DPS increases in these specific niche teams, or just be a better function in these teams in general. Now let's look at a few team examples, all of which have different ways to use Ayato. Let's start with the usual main DPS carry Ayato. This includes Vape, Freeze, Taser, Hypercarry, and the such. While he does do some reactions to these teams, you do not need to worry too much about EM. In these team comps, you will be running Gladiators, Echoes, Heart of Depths, Nymph Stream, Shimenawa, but I don't recommend this one due to Ayato wanting to ult every rotation. Some possible sets that can be interesting are Desert Pavilion. Just pretend that the 2-piece is the 10% attack speed, and all you need to do is do a charge attack before your rotation, which shouldn't be too hard. I only tested this set a little bit, but effectively put the extra attack speed felt very nice. In Taser, you can even opt in for Thundering Fury set to have 100% skill up time, and you can even run Retracing Bowlight if you have a shield in your team. As for Hypercarry team, since you'll be running Farina in these teams anyways, you can also consider Vermilion Hereafter and Undersea Hunter, but make sure you have good ping if you're running Echoes. You can also opt in for Retracing Bowlight if you have Constellations and want to run Zhongli as well. Again, you can consider this team at C0 as well, thanks to Farina unlocking the ability to use Ayato for Hypercarry at lower Constellations, but make sure that you have higher Constellations if you want to run a Shielder without Farina. Aim for a 1-to-2 crit ratio and a 1-to-3 or even 1-to-4 crit ratio on Undersea Hunter. Make sure you have at least 130 to 140 ER to make sure you can burst every rotation, and this can be lowered with Brain on the team or Fav users. Take a note that if you do run Favonius users on your team, they can lower your ER by 10 per Favonius proc. Now onto his Dendro teams, where he is an enabler and is just here to provide application and some damage, both of which he does a lot of. In these teams, he can run the same sets as before as well as some new ones. Thunder Soother and Thundering Fury are both good sets here if you're running him in Hyperbloom teams, with Thundering Fury giving you basically 100% scale up time and making sure you can do your main role of just applying Hydro and whacking enemies. This can be potentially the best set in these teams, but you can also consider other sets as the damage difference isn't too high and is mostly just a ease of use. Here are some example teams. Having enough energy recharge in these teams is very important, so I highly recommend you focus on this stat first and then aim for higher damage. Now, of course, I saved the best for last, as in these teams he plays in ways that some main DPS can never even imagine, and in other teams he functions as a burst support. Let's get the boring one out of the way first. Nah, I'm just kidding. He's still very strong in these teams. In burst support either teams, you want to go Emblem as it complements his energy costs and gives him a pretty good damage to his ultimate, which will also be the main source of his damage in these teams. You can also consider going Noblesse if you want a little bit more of team utility damage, but I highly recommend you go Emblem. There's not much to say about these teams besides the fact that he'll probably only be able to use his skill once per rotation, just so he can get enough energy to burst, and he'll mainly main off-field, and this is where he actually puts his 4th Ascension passive to use. While he may not be the center point of these teams, he can definitely output some pretty good damage when he's on-field, and even off-field. Again, you want to have a good balance of crit ratios. I highly recommend a 1-to-2 ratio, and you want to make sure that you have enough energy to burst every rotation, as this is very important in this team comp. Now, let me introduce you to the Duel carry team, a team where you take Ayato and another unit that has relatively low on-field time, and build a team where they are both able to take full advantage of their buffs in a short window. This is also a team that basically has no downtime and is constantly ulting one after another. Some of the second best DPSs I recommend to use with Ayato are Yoimiya, Raiden, Tignati, and Diluc. In the Yoimiya team, you're able to run double Hydro and double Pyro, but you can also try to potentially slot in Yunjin. Yoimiya is able to vape consistently thanks to Ayato's nice off-field application and do some nice damage too thanks to the 20% damage buff it provides. This alongside another Hydro and Bennett, they can both buff each other, as Yoimiya can buff Ayato by finishing her rotation with her burst for a nice 20% attack buff at max Ascension 1 passive stacks. Once again, energy is very important in this team style, so you want to make sure you have enough energy to burst reliably on all the units. In the Raiden team alternative, you can lean toward a hypercarry style with Bennett, plus an animal unit or Farina. You can also go more towards a Dendra team where you build a little bit of EM on Raiden for bloom damage. In this team, Raiden is able to take care of a little bit of your energy recharge needs, so you may run less ER depending on your team. Tignati also works a little similar to Raiden, where you can go hyper bloom version of the team or just focus on hypercarrying both of them with Bennett plus Farina. Lastly, Diluc is here for the budget option, as his on-field times aren't very long and he's able to fully utilize Ayato's support as well as being able to use his best supports, which are Bennett and Farina. Don't underestimate Diluc in these teams though, as he's able to output quite a large amount of damage, and you can even potentially swap Farina for Kazuha to get a large EM buff for both him and Ayato, as well as Kazuha being able to give a big more of a shift focus from one DPS to the other, whereas if you swirl Hydro, Diluc can vape more often, but if you swirl Pyro, Ayato can vape more often. These team comps in general are pretty expensive, as all the second DPS options are 5 stars and potential 5-star supports to consider too. But the damage this team does is no joke. This is a team that generally only Ayato can do thanks to the fact that he has both off and on-field application, as well as having a short DPS window. Not to mention his Hydro element allowing him to pair well with virtually any other DPS as long as they got a short damage window too. Ayato has always been in the larger criticism ever since his release, and while he may not have his full potential back then, we can definitely see the unit he has shaped up to be. A DPS, a support, and a diva who both loves to take the spotlight and let others shine when he pleases, of course. Thank you for watching this video and catching up with our little diva Ayato. If you want to see more character rerun reviews and bring a new perspective to them, or want to see our future projects, then leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to stay updated. This is Kamisada Art Taiso Games, and have a nice day.